Commander Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of the UES Defiant, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace dance beyond the reinforced viewport. The massive dreadnought's bridge hummed with quiet efficiency as her crew prepared for what could be humanity's most dangerous mission yet. 3 months had passed since the Galactic Council had branded Earth a death world and its inhabitants as the most dangerous species in known space. Today, they would prove just how right the Council had been. "Commander," called Lieutenant Morrison from the communications station, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the bridge. "We're receiving the distress signal again. It's getting stronger." Sarah nodded, her jaw set with determination. The signal had been haunting human space for weeks now, a desperate cry for help from the Zephyrian colony ship Peaceful Dawn. The message was simple but horrifying: their entire convoy of civilian vessels had been captured by the Korthak Empire, a brutal regime that specialized in enslaving entire species. The Zephyrians were peaceful traders, their elongated bodies and delicate features making them ideal diplomats but terrible fighters. They had no military, no weapons, and no hope of rescue. No hope, except from the Deathworlders. "How long until we reach the neutral zone?" Sarah asked, turning to face her navigation officer. 14 hours, Commander," replied Ensign Rodriguez, his fingers dancing across the holographic display. "The fleet is maintaining formation. All ships report ready for combat." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The human strike fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 12 heavy cruisers, 8 destroyers, and 6 support ships, all bristling with weapons that made other species' militaries look like children's toys. But the real weapon wasn't the ships, it was the humans aboard them. Earth had been classified as a Class 12 death world, the highest rating on the Galactic Council's scale. Most species evolved on worlds where the biggest threats were seasonal weather changes or the occasional meteor shower. Humans had evolved on a planet where everything, from the smallest bacteria to the largest predators, was actively trying to kill them. This had created a species that was almost incomprehensibly dangerous by galactic standards. "Commander Chen," a new voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Dr. Elena Vasquez approaching, her expression grim. As the fleet's xenobiologist and diplomatic advisor, Elena had been working around the clock to understand their enemy. "What do you have for me, Doctor?" Sarah asked. Elena activated a holographic display, showing the reptilian features of a Korthak warrior. The Korthaks are a fascinating species, from a military perspective. They evolved on a world with roughly half Earth's gravity and a much thicker atmosphere. This makes them excellent pilots and gives them superior lung capacity, but they're physically weaker than humans. Weaknesses? Several. They rely heavily on their energy weapons, which are designed to overwhelm opponents through sustained fire rather than accuracy. Their armor is sophisticated but light, it won't stop kinetic rounds. Most importantly, they've never faced a species that fights back the way humans do. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning they're used to conquering species that surrender the moment they're outgunned. They've never had to deal with opponents who become more dangerous when cornered. Elena's smile was sharp. They're about to learn what happens when you threaten something humans care about. The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of the ship's systems. Sarah looked out at the stars, thinking about the desperate message they'd received. The Zephyrians weren't just allies, they were friends. In the few months since humanity had joined the galactic community, the peaceful traders had been among the first to welcome them. They'd shared their knowledge, their culture, and their trust. The Korthaks had made a mistake. They'd attacked friends of humanity. "All hands, this is Commander Chen," Sarah announced over the ship's communication system. "We are approaching the neutral zone where the Zephyrian convoy was last seen. Intelligence suggests the Korthaks have established a temporary base in the asteroid field of the Kepler 442 system. We go in hard and fast, no warnings, no negotiations. They wanted to see what Deathworlders are capable of. Today, we show them." The next few hours passed in tense preparation. Weapons were charged, armor was checked, and boarding parties were briefed. The human fleet had trained for this moment, but none of them had ever faced an enemy quite like the Korthaks. The reptilian empire had conquered 17 different species over the past century, turning entire worlds into slave colonies. They were efficient, ruthless, and completely unprepared for what was coming. "Dropping out of hyperspace in 30 seconds, announced Rodriguez. Sarah took her position in the captain's chair, her hands gripping the armrests. Around her, the bridge crew prepared for battle with the calm professionalism that had made humanity's military legendary even among the peaceful species of the galaxy. 10 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, normal space. The swirling colors of hyperspace vanished, replaced by the stark beauty of the Kepler 442 system. Immediately, the tactical display lit up with contact markers. The Korthak fleet was exactly where intelligence had predicted, a collection of sleek, predatory vessels arranged in a defensive formation around a massive asteroid that had been converted into a temporary base. "Enemy contacts," shouted Lieutenant Morrison. 12 heavy cruisers, 8 destroyers, and... "Commander, they've got the Zephyrian ships." Sarah's blood ran cold as she saw the civilian vessels on the display. The Peaceful Dawn and her escorts were docked to the asteroid base, their elegant curves marred by crude docking clamps and weapon emplacements. The Korthaks had turned the rescue ships into part of their fortress. "They're using the Zephyrians as human shields," Elena whispered, her face pale. "No," Sarah corrected, her voice like steel. "They're using them as Zephyrian shields. And they're about to learn the difference." The Korthak fleet was already moving, their ships breaking formation to engage the human vessels. Sarah watched as the reptilian warships accelerated toward them, their energy weapons beginning to glow with deadly light. "All ships, this is Defiant Actual," Sarah broadcast to the fleet. "Execute attack pattern Delta. Remember, those civilian ships contain our friends. We get them back, and we make the Korthaks pay for taking them." The human fleet exploded into action. Unlike the rigid formations favored by most galactic militaries, the human ships moved in a complex, seemingly chaotic pattern that was actually carefully coordinated. They'd learned their tactics from Earth's apex predators, wolves, sharks, and humans themselves. The first exchange of fire lit up the darkness of space. Korthak energy beams lanced out, brilliant streams of coherent light that would have devastated most species' ships. But human vessels were built to different standards. Their armor was designed to withstand not just weapons, but the crushing depths of Earth's oceans and the radiation of solar storms. The energy beams that struck them scattered harmlessly across their hulls. The return fire was devastating. Human kinetic weapons, railguns that fired slugs of tungsten at significant fractions of light speed, punched through Korthak shields like they weren't even there. The reptilian ship's elegant curves were no match for projectiles that hit with the force of small asteroids. "Direct hit on the lead Korthak cruiser," reported the tactical officer. "Their shields are down, and they're venting atmosphere." But Sarah's attention was focused on the asteroid base. Long-range sensors were picking up life signs aboard the captured Zephyrian vessels. The civilians were still alive, but for how long? The Korthaks were notorious for their treatment of prisoners, and Sarah knew they wouldn't hesitate to start executing hostages if they felt cornered. "Commander," Morrison called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the Korthak flagship." "Put it through." The main viewscreen flickered, showing the scarred face of a Korthak commander. His reptilian features were twisted with rage, but Sarah could see the fear in his yellow eyes. The human fleet had just demonstrated that they were not like the other species the Korthaks had conquered. "Human commander," the alien hissed, his voice translated by the ship's universal translator. "You will withdraw immediately, or we will execute the prisoners. We have over 3,000 Zephyrians aboard these vessels. Their deaths will be on your heads." Sarah stood up, her expression cold as vacuum. "Korthak Commander, I am Sarah Chen of the United Earth Space Force. You have exactly one opportunity to surrender and release the prisoners. If you refuse, we will take them by force." The reptilian commander's laugh was like breaking glass. "You Deathworlders may be strong, but you are not gods. We have weapons trained on the prisoner ships. One word from me, and they all die. You cannot save them and defeat us." "Watch us," Sarah said, and cut the transmission. The bridge was silent for a moment, then Sarah turned to her crew. "Morrison, patch me through to the fleet. All ships, all channels. Channel open, Commander. All ships, this is Chen. The court hacks think they can use innocent people as shields. They think we'll back down rather than risk civilian casualties. They're wrong. We're not backing down, and we're not letting those people die. Echo Squadron, begin your run. All other ships, execute Pattern Sigma on my mark. What happened next became known throughout the galaxy as the Kepler maneuver, a tactical movement so audacious that it was studied in military academies for decades afterward. The human fleet didn't charge the asteroid base as the court hacks expected. Instead, they scattered, seeming to retreat in disorder. The reptilian commander, thinking he had won, began to pursue what he thought were fleeing human ships. He was wrong. The human vessels weren't retreating, they were setting up a complex three-dimensional trap. As the Korthak fleet extended itself, trying to chase down the fleeing humans, they found themselves caught in a web of crossfire. Human ships that had seemed to be running suddenly wheeled around, their weapons blazing. The court hacks, who had been in pursuit formation, found themselves scattered and vulnerable. Meanwhile, Echo Squadron, 6 human destroyers commanded by Captain James Rodriguez, were executing the most dangerous part of the plan. Using the asteroid field as cover, they approached the base from its blind side, their ship's stealth systems masking their approach. The court hacks had sensors, but they were designed to detect the energy signatures of conventional ships, not the cold-running, heavily shielded vessels of the human fleet. Echo Leader to Defiant, came Rodriguez's voice over the communication channel. We're in position. Boarding parties are ready. Sarah watched the tactical display as the main battle raged around them. The human fleet was systematically destroying the Korthak vessels, but she knew the real fight was just beginning. The court hacks still held the prisoners, and the asteroid base was heavily fortified. Echo Squadron, you are green for Operation Rescue, Sarah authorized. Godspeed. The boarding action began with a precision that would have been impossible for most species. Human Marines, encased in powered armor and armed with weapons that could cut through ship hulls, used cutting torches to breach the asteroid base's outer hull. But this wasn't a simple smash-and-grab operation. The base was a maze of corridors and chambers, and the court hacks had had weeks to prepare their defenses. The first wave of Marines, led by Major Patricia Williams, encountered heavy resistance the moment they breached the hull. Korthak warriors, their reptilian forms encased in powered armor, opened fire with energy weapons that could melt steel. But the human Marines had trained for this. They moved like ghosts through the corridors, using their superior reflexes and tactical awareness to outmaneuver their enemies. Contact, Corridor 7. Williams' voice crackled over the calmed multiple hostiles, engaging. The battle inside the asteroid base was unlike anything the court hacks had experienced. They were used to fighting enemies who stood in formations and exchanged fire in predictable patterns. The human Marines fought like the predators they were, using cover, misdirection, and devastating firepower to systematically clear each section of the base. But Sarah knew they were running out of time. The court hacks had made it clear they would kill the prisoners rather than let them be rescued. Every second counted. Williams, what's your status? Sarah asked. We've cleared the outer sections, Commander, came the reply. But the prisoners are in the center of the base, and it's heavily defended. The court hacks have set up a kill zone around the detention area. We're going to need a distraction. Sarah looked at the tactical display. The main battle was winding down, only 3 Korthak ships remained, and they were heavily damaged. But the asteroid base was still a fortress, and the Marines were facing the equivalent of a medieval siege. All ships, this is Chen, Sarah announced. We're going to give our people the distraction they need. Defiant, close to weapons range of the asteroid base. All other ships, maintain covering fire. Commander, Elena protested, the base has heavy defensive weapons. If we get too close. Then we get too close, Sarah cut her off. Those people are counting on us. The UES Defiant turned toward the asteroid base, its massive bulk accelerating toward the fortified position. Immediately, the base's weapons opened fire, massive energy cannons that could punch through the hull of a cruiser. But the Defiant was no ordinary cruiser. It was humanity's newest dreadnought, designed to survive in the most hostile environments imaginable. The ship shuddered as energy beams struck its hull, but the armor held. Sarah gripped her command chair as the ship closed to point-blank range with the asteroid base. "Fire," she commanded. The Defiant's main guns opened up, massive railguns that fired projectiles the size of ground cars. The asteroid base's shields flared and died under the sustained bombardment. Chunks of rock and metal were blasted away, revealing the complex network of tunnels and chambers within. "That's our cue," Williams shouted over the comms. "All units, advance." The human Marines surged forward, taking advantage of the chaos caused by the Defiant's bombardment. They moved through the damaged sections of the base like a tide of death, their weapons cutting down any Korthak who dared to stand in their way. But the Korthaks weren't finished. As the Marines approached the detention area, they found themselves facing the enemy's elite guards, warriors in advanced powered armor who fought with the desperation of cornered animals. The corridor filled with the sound of energy weapons and the distinctive crack of human kinetic rifles. "I need a way through," Williams called out. "The detention area is just ahead, but they've got us pinned down." Sarah watched the tactical display, her mind racing. The Marines were so close to the prisoners, but the Korthaks were making a final stand. She needed to do something decisive. "Elena," she called to the xenobiologist, "those energy weapons the Korthaks are using, what powers them?" "Plasma conduits running through the walls," Elena replied immediately. "They tap into the base's main power grid." "Why?" Sarah smiled grimly. "Because humans don't fight fair." "Morrison, patch me through to Williams." "Williams here, Commander." "Major, I need you to fall back to the junction you passed 30 meters ago." "Trust me on this." "Roger that, Commander." "All units, fall back to checkpoint 7. As the Marines retreated, Sarah turned to her weapons officer. "Target the power conduits Elena identified." "I want surgical strikes enough to knock out their weapons but not enough to damage the detention area." "Targeting now, Commander." The Defiant's secondary guns opened fire, sending precisely aimed shots through the breached hull of the asteroid base. The beams struck the power conduits exactly where Elena had predicted, and the entire section of the base went dark. "Now!" Sarah shouted over the comm. Go, go." The Marines surged forward again, their armor's built-in lights cutting through the darkness. The Korthak defenders, suddenly blinded and with their weapons powerless, were easy prey for the advancing humans. Williams kicked down the door to the detention area, her rifle ready. What she found inside made her blood boil. The Zephyrians were packed into cells designed for half their number, their elegant forms cramped and bruised. Many showed signs of torture, their normally pristine feathers dirty and broken. At the center of the detention area, a group of Korthak guards stood around a single Zephyrian who was chained to a post. "Let them go," Williams said, her voice carrying the promise of violence. The lead Korthak guard, a massive reptilian with scarred hide, bared his teeth. "You are too late, Deathworlder. The executions have already begun." That's when Williams noticed the bodies. 3 Zephyrians lay motionless on the floor, their life force drained away. The Korthaks had been systematically murdering their prisoners, and Williams realized with horror that they were planning to kill them all rather than let them be rescued. "You made a mistake," Williams said, her voice deadly calm. "You hurt our friends." What followed was not a battle, it was an execution. The human Marines, driven by rage at the sight of murdered civilians, showed the Korthaks exactly why their species was classified as a death world. The reptilian guards, elite warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds, lasted less than 30 seconds against humans who had been pushed too far. "Detention area secure," Williams reported, her voice tight with controlled fury. "We have survivors, but..." "Commander, they killed some of them. The bastards killed them just because they could." Sarah's jaw clenched. She had hoped to end this without unnecessary bloodshed, but the Korthaks had crossed a line that should never be crossed. They had murdered innocent people out of spite. "Casualties?" she asked. 17 Zephyrians dead, over 100 wounded. The rest are alive but traumatized. They're going to need medical attention. Medical teams are standing by. Get our people out of there, Major. As the rescue operation continued, Sarah turned her attention to the few remaining Korthak ships. The reptilian commander who had threatened her earlier was still alive, his flagship damaged but not destroyed. She opened a communication channel. "Korthak Commander," she said, her voice carrying the weight of judgment. "Your forces have been defeated. Your base has been taken. You murdered innocent civilians under a flag of truce. By the laws of war recognized by every civilized species, you are guilty of war crimes." The reptilian's image flickered on the screen, his scarred face twisted with hatred. "You think you have won, Deathworlder? We are not the only fleet in Korthak space. My people will remember this day. We will have our revenge." "No," Sarah said simply. "You won't." The remaining human ships opened fire simultaneously, their weapons converging on the Korthak flagship. The reptilian commander's last transmission was a scream of rage that was cut short as his ship was vaporized. The battle was over. But Sarah knew that the real consequences were just beginning. The human fleet had just demonstrated something that would send shockwaves throughout the galaxy. They had shown that Deathworlders didn't just fight to win, they fought to protect. And anyone who threatened what they protected would face the full fury of humanity's wrath. Dr. Elena Vesquez joined Sarah at the observation deck as the rescue ships began transferring the surviving Zephyrians to medical facilities. The elegant aliens moved slowly, their trauma evident in every gesture, but they were alive. They had been saved. "The Galactic Council is going to have questions," Elena said quietly. "We just destroyed an entire Korthak fleet. Some species are going to be terrified of us." Sarah nodded, watching as the last of the survivors were brought aboard the human ships. "Let them be terrified. The galaxy has been letting the Korthaks get away with this for too long. Someone had to take a stand. And if the Korthak Empire retaliates?" Sarah's smile was cold as space. "Then they'll learn what happens when you go to war with Deathworlders." The human fleet began its journey home, carrying the rescued Zephyrians and the knowledge that they had struck a blow against one of the galaxy's most brutal empires. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The Korthaks would not forget this humiliation, and neither would the other species who had been watching from the sidelines. Humanity had announced its presence in the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. They had shown that they were not just dangerous, they were protective. And that combination would reshape the balance of power among the stars. 3 days later, the human fleet arrived at Zephyrian space, where they were greeted by a sight that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Hundreds of Zephyrian ships had gathered to welcome their returning people, their elegant forms creating a beautiful constellation against the stars. The rescued civilians were transferred to their own people's care, but not before a ceremony that would be remembered by both species forever. Ambassador Teleth, the senior Zephyrian diplomat, approached Sarah as she stood in the docking bay of the Peaceful Dawn. The elegant alien moved slowly, her feathers still bearing the marks of her captivity, but her eyes were bright with gratitude. "Commander Chen," Teleth said, her voice carrying the musical quality that made Zephyrian speech so beautiful. "My people owe you a debt that can never be repaid. You risked everything to save us." Sarah shook her head. "We did what anyone should do. We helped our friends." "The galaxy is not full of friends like humanity," Teleth replied. "Most species would have calculated the cost and decided it was too high. You calculated the cost and decided it was worth paying." "The cost was worth it," Sarah said simply. "Your people are safe. That's what matters." Teleth extended one delicate hand, and Sarah took it gently. The Zephyrian skin was warm and soft, like touching a flower petal. "The Korthaks will not forget this defeat. They will seek revenge." "Let them come," Sarah replied. "We'll be ready." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah knew that the real battle was just beginning. The destruction of the Korthak fleet had sent ripples throughout the galaxy. Some species saw it as a beacon of hope, proof that the brutal empire could be defeated. Others saw it as a threat, evidence that the Deathworlders were too dangerous to be allowed to exist. The political ramifications became clear within days of the fleet's return to Earth. The Galactic Council, the loose confederation of species that governed interstellar relations, was in uproar. Emergency sessions were called, and humanity found itself at the center of a debate that would determine the future of galactic civilization. Sarah found herself recalled to Earth to testify before the Council, along with the other senior officers from the mission. The Council chambers were a marvel of engineering, a vast space station that could accommodate representatives from hundreds of different species. But as Sarah walked into the main assembly hall, she could feel the tension in the air. The Council was divided into 3 factions. The first, led by species like the Zephyrians and the peaceful Andromedans, supported humanity's actions. They argued that the Cortax had been a cancer on galactic civilization for too long, and that someone had to take a stand. The second faction, dominated by the militaristic Centauri Republic, viewed humanity as a threat that needed to be contained. They feared that the Deathworlders would upset the delicate balance of power that had maintained peace for centuries. The third faction, led by the ancient and wise Ethereals, remained neutral but concerned. They had seen civilizations rise and fall over millions of years, and they recognized that humanity represented something new in the galaxy, a species that was both incredibly dangerous and utterly committed to protecting those they considered friends. The session began with testimony from the Zephyrian survivors. Ambassador Teleth, despite her injuries, stood before the Council and described the horrors of Cortac captivity. Her words painted a picture of systematic torture and murder, of innocent civilians treated as less than animals by their reptilian captors. The humans did not start this conflict, Teleth said, her musical voice carrying throughout the chamber. They finished it. They answered our call for help when no one else would. They risked their lives to save people who were not their own species, not their own citizens. This is not the action of a dangerous predator, it is the action of a true friend. The Centauri representative, a tall humanoid with blue skin and silver eyes, rose to respond. The Zephyrians' suffering was tragic, but it does not justify the humans' actions. They destroyed an entire Cortac fleet without attempting negotiation. They have shown that they will use overwhelming force to achieve their goals. How long before they turn that force against other species? Sarah felt her anger rising, but she remained silent. She had been instructed to let the diplomats handle the political aspects of the hearing. But when the Centauri representative began to question the human military's excessive response, she couldn't contain herself any longer. Excessive response? Sarah stood up, her voice carrying the authority of command. They were executing civilians. They told us directly that they would kill innocent people rather than let them be rescued. What part of that suggests negotiation was possible? The Centauri representative's silver eyes flashed. You could have attempted a prisoner exchange. You could have offered ransom. You could have sought a diplomatic solution. With people who torture children for entertainment? Sarah's voice was cold as space. With a species that has enslaved 17 different civilizations? There is no negotiating with that kind of evil. The chamber erupted in argument as representatives from different species voiced their opinions. Some supported Sarah's position, while others argued for the importance of diplomatic solutions. But the most powerful voice came from an unexpected source. The ethereal representative, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline form, had remained silent throughout the debate. Now, for the first time in decades, it spoke. The humans are correct, the ethereal said, its voice resonating with ancient authority. We have watched the Cortax spread their poison throughout the galaxy for too long. We have allowed them to enslave entire species because we were afraid of the consequences of action. The humans were not afraid. They acted when action was necessary. The chamber fell silent. The ethereals were the oldest species in the galaxy, and their words carried enormous weight. When they spoke, other species listened. The humans are dangerous, the ethereal continued. This is undeniable. But they are dangerous to the right targets. They could have easily conquered the Zephyrians, but instead they saved them. They could have enslaved the survivors, but instead they returned them to their people. This is not the behavior of a species that seeks domination, it is the behavior of a species that seeks justice. The vote, when it came, was closer than Sarah had hoped but decisive enough to matter. The Galactic Council officially condemned the Korthak Empire and authorized the formation of a joint task force to combat their slave raids. Humanity would lead this task force, with support from other species who had grown tired of the Korthak's brutality. But Sarah knew that the real victory wasn't in the council chambers, it was in the message that the rescue mission had sent throughout the galaxy. The Korthaks had learned that there were consequences for their actions. Other predatory species had learned that humanity would not tolerate the abuse of innocent people. And the peaceful species had learned that they had powerful allies in their fight against oppression. The formation of the Joint Task Force took months of negotiation and planning. Species that had never worked together before had to learn to coordinate their efforts. The Zephyrians contributed their superior sensor technology and diplomatic skills. The Andromedans provided advanced medical facilities and logistics support. The Centauri Republic, despite their initial opposition, eventually contributed a squadron of their fastest ships. But it was the human contingent that formed the backbone of the task force. Sarah found herself promoted to admiral and given command of the entire operation. Her flagship, the newly commissioned UES Retribution, was the largest warship ever built by humanity, a massive dreadnought that could single-handedly take on a Korthak fleet. The task force's first mission came 6 months after the rescue at Kepler 442. Intelligence reports indicated that the Korthaks were planning a major slave raid on the Talaxian colonies, a peaceful species known for their agricultural expertise. The Talaxians had no military to speak of, making them perfect targets for Korthak slavers. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Retribution as the task force dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Talaxian system. The sight that greeted them was both expected and infuriating. A massive Korthak fleet, over 40 ships, was systematically attacking the agricultural colonies, their weapons targeting not military installations but civilian centers. Admiral, reported Captain Rodriguez, who had been promoted to serve as Sarah's second-in-command, were detecting massive casualties on the planet's surface. The Korthaks aren't just raiding, they're conducting a systematic extermination campaign. Sarah's jaw clenched. The Korthaks had learned from their defeat at Kepler 442. They were no longer taking prisoners who could be rescued, they were simply killing everyone who might resist. All ships, this is Admiral Chen, Sarah broadcast to the task force. The Korthaks have escalated their tactics. They're not just enslaving people anymore, they're committing genocide. We end this now. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Joint Task Force, combining human aggression with alien technology, tore through the Korthak fleet like a sword through silk. Zephyrian sensors identified targets with perfect accuracy, while human weapons destroyed them with devastating efficiency. Andromedan medical ships stood by to treat survivors, while Centauri fast attack craft harassed the enemy's flanks. But it was the humans who led the charge, their ships diving into the enemy formation with a recklessness that terrified their allies and enemies alike. The Korthaks, who had expected to face a disorganized resistance, found themselves confronting a coordinated assault that shattered their formations and destroyed their morale. Korthak flagship is breaking off, reported the tactical officer. They're trying to retreat. Sarah smiled grimly. The Korthaks had made another mistake. They thought they could hit innocent people and then run away when faced with real opposition. They were wrong. All human ships, pursue and engage, Sarah ordered. No survivors. The chase through the Talaxian system was swift and brutal. The human ships, designed for speed and endurance, easily caught up with the fleeing Korthaks. The reptilian vessels, damaged and demoralized, offered little resistance as they were systematically destroyed. But the real victory came when the task force reached the planet's surface. The Korthaks had managed to capture several thousand Talaxians before the human fleet arrived, but unlike at Kepler 442, these prisoners were still alive. The rapid response had prevented a massacre. The rescue operation was a masterpiece of coordination. Human Marines, supported by Zephyrian medics and Andromedan logistics, evacuated the prisoners while Centauri engineers worked to repair the damaged colonies. Within hours, the Talaxians were free, their colonies were secure, and the Korthak threat in their system was eliminated. But Sarah knew that each victory was also raising the stakes. The Korthaks were learning from their defeats, adapting their tactics, and growing more desperate. The next confrontation would be even more dangerous. That confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. Intelligence reports indicated that the Korthak Empire was assembling their largest fleet ever, over 200 ships, for a massive assault on Earth itself. The reptilian leadership had decided that the only way to stop the human threat was to destroy it at its source. Sarah stood in the Situation Room of Starfleet Command, looking at the holographic display that showed the approaching Korthak Armada. The fleet was massive, larger than anything humanity had ever faced. But it wasn't just the size that worried her. It was the timing. "They're not just coming for Earth," she said to the assembled officers. "They're coming for every human colony, every human outpost, every human ship they can find. This isn't a military campaign, it's an extermination attempt." Admiral Marcus Webb, the head of Starfleet Command, nodded grimly. "Our deep space monitors confirm it. They've split their fleet into multiple task forces. They're planning simultaneous attacks on at least 12 different human systems." "What about the Joint Task Force?" asked Captain Rodriguez. Sarah shook her head. "The other species are willing to help, but they're not willing to risk their homeworlds for us. The Zephyrians have offered to take our civilians as refugees, but their ships aren't designed for combat. The Andromedans will provide medical support, but they won't fight. The Centauri Republic has recalled their ships to defend their own territory. So we're on our own," Webb said. "We're on our own," Sarah confirmed. "But we're not helpless. We have advantages the Korthaks don't expect." The defense of Earth and the human colonies was planned with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made the rescue at Kepler 442 successful. But this time, humanity was facing an enemy that vastly outnumbered them. The Korthaks were bringing over 200 ships against humanity's entire space navy of 60 vessels. The odds were impossible. But humanity had faced impossible odds before. Sarah's strategy was based on a simple principle: the Korthaks expected humans to defend their worlds the way other species did, with static defenses and predictable tactics. Instead, humanity would do what they did best: adapt, improvise, and attack when the enemy least expected it. The first phase of the battle began when the Korthak fleet entered the Sol system. Sarah watched from the bridge of the Retribution as the massive enemy armada dropped out of hyperspace, their ships arranged in the precise formations that had conquered 17 different species. "Admiral," reported the communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from the Korthak fleet commander." "Put it through." The main viewscreen showed the scarred face of a Korthak general, his reptilian features twisted with hatred. "I am General Vextar of the Korthak Empire. You have interfered with our operations for the last time, Deathworlders. Today, your species dies.